There we go. Okay, students. So we're recording. So welcome to, I guess today is October 7th, and this is Humanities 111. And we're going to be talking about Rome today, but I'll do my usual reminders of this is the stuff that we should be working on. The biographical book review. I've had a number of students from each of the 111 class ask me questions about it. A biography is a book about a person, and you need to find a biography out there in the world of books somewhere. Book on tape, book from a library. I don't care. Not from our textbook. I mean, you can get the individual's name from a textbook, but you got to find a book, and then you're going to send me the name of the book and who the author is by the 10th of October. Then you'll actually read the book and do a little review on it. You'll tell me what the book was about, and if it's about Julius Caesar, you'll say, this book was about Julius Caesar. Here's who he was. He picked his nose, and that kind of stuff. And then for the last half of that paper, the last page and a half, is you'll say what you liked and what you didn't like. He picked his nose with his left hand, or whatever it was. Maybe you liked that, or maybe you didn't. But that's the bio book review that you're going to do. And if you still have questions on it, go ahead and ask me. But we'll be able to kind of iron those out. So last but not least, here's the stuff that we're gonna talk about today. Rome, obviously, we're gonna cover Roman taxes, and we're gonna talk about your writing assignment 4.5, and it uses the acronym ALLCARE, and that is a subject of one of the test questions for the final, or at least it has been in the past. So just kind of letting you know about that stuff. This stuff I crossed off because we covered that on Monday. Okay, I'm not going to give you a lot of feedback yet because there's still a couple of students, and the dog ate their homework or whatever, and so they've got another day or so to finish up the test. But I will talk about some test things in general that nobody likes tests, or very few people do. But what it does is it actually forces us to learn material in a different way, because you can sit back and watch, listen to Finnegan talk and watch his videos and read the book and, watch the videos that are the assignments. But if you don't have a forcing function like a test, you don't remember it as well. And the stress associated with taking a test really does help you remember the information more. And believe me, I was not a believer in that until I've been on the receiving end of it and thought about it, gave it a little bit of thoughtful reflection. And it's like, oh yeah, I guess I did learn this stuff better by having to have a test on it. And one of the great examples that I can give you just real quick is Mr. Spielman, who's an academic advisor at Rock Valley. He also teaches history of the United States. And I took 2 different classes from him. And in one class, we had to read Uncle Tom's Cabin, which is a classic. I never read it when I was in high school, certainly didn't read it in college. And I was just surprised about how, what a great picture that gave of slavery, pre-Civil War, and how, I mean, everybody knows that slavery was bad, but it illustrated it in a more human way. And so I was very grateful for him that he had us read the book, and then we had to do some stuff associated with that book. And his tests, he would have us write essays. And now, God bless him for being able to read my handwriting, but he was able to, read our essays and stuff like that. And we physically had to go into the testing center to write the essays out. And, you couldn't bring any notes with you or anything like that. So you had to kind of memorize the outline of your essays. And then, he gave us like, okay, I'm going to ask you 3 of these 6 essays. And it was a good exercise for me. And I did this just 4 or 5 years ago. So, I already had a couple of master's degrees and, thought I knew everything about everything. But, that helped me realize that, yeah, these tests actually do force us to remember things better and to learn things in a different way. So anyway, that's my long and short story about the purpose of taking a test. We study humanities to try to see where we get things from the past, what was done well in the past and what was done poorly in the past. And I'll give you an example on that is Pericles. Pericles did some things pretty well. You guys wrote about him and stuff like that. He also did some things poorly, I'm not going to go into that right now, but I think if you just think about it for a minute, okay, we talked about, what happened that was good in that society, what happened that was all hosed up in that society, and, eventually caused that society to collapse. And so the point is that we can learn from the past on that. Now what you're going to see in Rome is that Rome did some things pretty well too. We talked about that Pax Romana last time, that allowed their culture to just grow and flourish. Then we'll see some things that Rome did wrong in Mike's opinion, and kind of led to their demise as well. And again, we want to try to learn from the past so that we don't repeat those mistakes. So that's that. Just as a yeah, we'll talk more about the test after everybody's done with it. But anyway, I did want to kind of cover those things. You guys had some recognition questions and you had some essay questions, and I was very impressed with the answers that I got on the essays. So it's either teacher pleasing behavior or it's not. Now, one of the things that one student did, and I don't recall which class it was from, but I had kind of led you all to believe that the answer I was looking for on democracy is that direct democracy isn't quite as good as uh, representative democracy because it doesn't protect the rights of individuals. Direct democracy does not. And the answer that one student gave was to me remarkable because it showed a lot of thought, and it actually argued against what I was saying. And in a nutshell, what he said was, well, if you've got a small enough society, direct democracy can work pretty well because and I'm using my words, not his, but because the people involved, uh, you can have the protection of the sheep. Two wolves and a sheep analogy. You can have the sheep protected because there will be people looking out for the sheep, the goodness of the sheep. So I was really surprised by that answer, but it was very thoughtful. And so teacher pleasing behavior isn't what we're looking for here. It's thoughtful behavior. But again, a lot of great answers that were in line with teacher pleasing behavior too. So very, very good job almost across the board on the test. And I haven't graded them all for this class yet, but I've got more than half of them done. So anyway, that's that. So let's get into taxes today. And you guys are going to hear me talk about taxes for a while. And then I think when my voice runs out, I'm going to try to show you a video that kind of summarizes some of the history of Rome a little bit. And we'll talk about some of your video assignments as well. But can somebody tell me what a tax is?
I'll say like a tax is like a payment you have to make to the government.
Right, exactly. It's a payment that goes to the government, whether it's a local, state, or federal government. And so, Carson, thanks. What's the purpose of a tax? Now, Carson just said it's a payment, but what's the purpose of a tax?
To maintain the government, like so that the country runs well.
Yeah, it funds Yeah. So yeah, Kimberly, to use your words, it funds some of the functions of government, right? Yeah, I think that's a very good good answer. And we'll see that taxes also do a few other things, but let's keep going here. So what kind of taxes do we pay? Can anybody come up with one kind of tax?
Income.
Income tax certainly is a big one. Now that's only big if you have income, but yes, that's income tax is one that we hear about a lot. Um, how about another kind of tax?
State tax.
Say that again.
State tax.
State tax, yes. And now you're saying STATE, not S-state. Is that correct, Brianna?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Federal income tax, state income tax is another one. And in fact, there's if you watch TV, and I I know that most of you guys don't, and I don't blame you. There's a big push right now on this fair tax. Is it, oh, we're going to make the millionaires and billionaires pay taxes. And, so that's one side of the argument. The other side of the argument is that this allows the state to raise taxes on anybody they want to, anytime they want to, without putting it to a vote of the people. And arguably they could do that anyway, because we're a representative democracy, not a direct democracy. But it's just going to make it very easy for that to happen, maybe sometime. So we'll see. But yeah, good comment there. Any other kinds of taxes that we pay?
Property
Sales
tax.
I heard somebody say sales tax. Nikki, was that you?
No, I say property tax.
Oh, property tax. Yeah. Well, I tell you what, you guys have kind of hit them all here. So we have property taxes, income tax, sales tax. The other kind of tax that's well, and let's talk about that. A sales tax is, if you go in and buy a pack of chewing gum or something like that at the grocery store, and this will show you the last time I bought chewing gum, but get one of those chiclets, or what do they call Orbit things, it's $4. But if you go and go up to Walmart and check out with it, they're going to charge you $4.67 or something like that, $4.47. Why? Because there's a sales tax associated with it. And again, that gives the government money, in this case, the state, and then, in some places, local money to operate with. Property taxes are another one. And boy, who said that? Nikki, was that you, or somebody said property taxes? I don't remember who. All right. Well, anyway, if you own property, you get to pay tax on that property on a yearly basis. But, part of that covers the cost of schools and other things. There's, if you have a car and you have to put a license plate on it. And that license plate annual cost is a tax as well. Last but not least, our payroll taxes. And if somebody has a job, and I know some of you do and some of you don't, and it's okay, because one of your jobs here in school is to be a student. So, don't feel guilty if you don't have a job. But if you do have a job and you're going to school, hooray for you, because it's good and it'll look good on a resume. But when you are working, and if you make $10 an hour, or whatever minimum wage is now, you don't get that full $10. Why? Because the government, the big bad government, is pulling money out. They're pulling money out for Social Security. They're pulling money out for Medicare. They're pulling money out for federal income tax and for state income tax. So you're not going to get $10 an hour in your check. That's just the way it is. So let's keep talking about taxes. Now, Rome didn't invent taxes, but what they did is they really went and took taxes to the next level. And remember, Rome was getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, so they needed to spend money for their army. They needed to spend money for building the Colosseum and the Forum and the circus and running aqueducts, and providing water to everybody, and then later on the breads and circuses to keep people entertained. And they needed a lot of money for a lot of different things, just like our state, local, and federal governments need money for a lot of things even today. So that's what they did. Now, they did a good job of raising money. You remember, I think we talked about in Greece that they actually had a special let's go to war tax, which I think is kind of a novel idea because it really is a disincentive for people to want to go to war. I'm not sure that you would want much of an incentive for that anyway, but I think it's kind of good not to go to war unless you really need to. But there are some things that are worse than not going to war too. So anyway, what Rome did is they took taxes to another level, but then also it contributed to the decline of the Roman Empire. And even though we're not going in chronological order today, I want to talk about taxes in some detail because Rome did some good things with taxes and some things that we do today. And then they did some bad things with taxes too. So originally they had a wealth tax, and it was a tax on, the stuff that you had. And there's some talk about us having a wealth tax even today. So not based on income or spending, but just on having wealth. But it funded the government and it allowed them to do a lot of things. Now later on, the government got lazy or efficient or whatever, and they actually hired a company, if you want to call it that, to collect taxes. Now, here's the problem is if you have a company or if you have soldiers collecting taxes, that really opens the door for corruption, exploitation. Boy, corruption must have been important because I put it in there twice. And it encouraged a revolt. People started to distrust the government. Do we trust our government today or do we distrust it?
Want to trust it, don't always
Yeah,
trust.
and yeah, and Kimberly, you were because Big Brother is listening. We got to be careful what we say here, right? Yeah, it's we trust our government sometimes, in some aspects, and in some aspects we don't. If and I'm not going to get political here, but yeah, there are some things about the government we trust and some things that we don't. If you go back to when I was your age, the Vietnam War was going on. And what we found out later is that our government was lying to us about Vietnam. Now, some people, believe that early on. Some people, were late coming to the party on that. But a guy by the name of, well, it doesn't matter. Military guy wrote a scathing criticism of, he called it Dereliction of Duty, was the name of the book that he wrote. It was his PhD dissertation. Most of the people in the Army don't get PhDs, and they certainly don't get it criticizing the US government. And that's exactly what he did. And it turned into a bestseller. And the guy, H.R. McMaster, was the guy that wrote it. He was President Trump's national security advisor for a short period of time. And what I predicted when I heard that he was going to be nominated is I predicted that he would not last very long in that job. Now, that's not a criticism of either McMaster or of President Trump. It was just a kind of a statement that this guy speaks the truth. And if you don't like what he says, it doesn't matter. He's going to tell it to you. And that's what he did. So, and President Trump fires a lot of people. So it wasn't a deal. But anyway, What he said is that, you know, during Vietnam, you couldn't trust the government to tell you the truth because back then President Johnson was lying and the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense were all lying, and indeed they were. So later on, there was a centralization of taxing that took place in Rome. So in other words, instead of this area taxing and using that money in this area of the country or of their empire, the money all got collected centrally and then redistributed. Well, that's more bureaucracy. It made for some things that were interesting. I'll just leave it at that.
Would that be kind of like similar to like our federal tax?
Yes, that's exactly
Okay.
what it is. So that just to jump on what Kimberly was saying is, you know, right now a lot of money goes to Washington D.C. and then Washington in turn passes that money back out to the states for the states to spend in certain ways, whether it's on education or on roads or in a whole bunch of areas. Now, that gives the federal government, our national government, a lot of control. And as an example, in the 1980s, the federal government said, okay, states, you will go and reduce the blood alcohol content, you know, for drunk driving. And if you don't, we're not going to give you this money for your roads. And states really didn't like that because states want to have some autonomy and the ability to make their own decisions on that. Up in Wisconsin, for example, of course, Wisconsin has a huge culture of drinking. And I'm not saying that to encourage you to go to college up there. That was, you know, I did, but that really, that it's not a good culture that they have. And so Wisconsin was one of the last states to go ahead and do that. But basically, when they hold all of this money out, the state doesn't really have any choice. You know, they basically have to go and change their laws to conform to what the national government does, or they don't get the money. And you need money to do things like to maintain your roads and everything. So anyway, now that was a little bit off topic, but not a lot. But let me share this thing. Do we use taxes today to change citizens' behavior? And you know, the example that I'm going to give you in Rome is they had a bachelor tax. So if you were a guy that was 25 years old and you weren't getting married, they taxed you more than if you were a married guy at 25 years old. So they did that to try to change citizen behavior. What they want to do, they wanted to have more people get married. Why? Because then you've got people that are going to procreate, have families, and then take care of those families. So that was the purpose of it. Now, do we use taxes to change behavior today?
I mean, kind of going off the bachelor tax, aren't there tax breaks for married couples?
Absolutely. Even today, there are tax breaks for married couples. So why does the government do that? Because we want to encourage people to be married and to procreate and to take care of their families. So yeah, now but actually it's a marriage penalty. So sometimes there's advantages not to getting married too. So, you know, that's a dumb move on our federal government, but you know, what's new? But you know, do we do other things and give tax breaks for other things? If you buy, well, let's say,
School.
say again?
For school, like education.
Yeah, I mean, you were kind of cutting out there. I couldn't follow.
Education for school.
Education at school. Yeah, if you're going to school, sometimes they'll give you a break tax wise or that kind of thing. So yeah, very very good comment there. If you are now, I'm not going to ask anybody if they're smokers, but does is there a huge tax on cigarettes?
Oh my God, yes. I just quit in August. I am saving so much money.
Yeah. And you know, a cigarette doesn't cost much money to make, but the federal government taxes the heck out of it. Why?
It was
Because
over $9 a pack.
yeah, because it's not healthy for you, you know, and they want to, in a way, discourage people from smoking. Now, at the same time, they pay the farmers to raise um, tobacco, you know, out in the Carolinas and in Virginia and stuff like that. So, you know, uh, it's goofy, but yeah, they do use that to try to modify behavior. They tax the heck out of alcohol the same way, because they want to control or at least reduce some behavior. If you're buying medical marijuana or recreational marijuana, they're taxing the heck out of that. Why? Because they're trying to make money, and you know they want to. Yeah, who knows? Okay, now, and last but not least, and since you guys are not of the house buying age, you probably wouldn't be aware of this, but the U.S. government will, if you owe money on a house, and most people that have houses owe money on it, all of the interest that you pay on that loan is a tax deduction. So why in the world would the U.S. government and state governments want to encourage home ownership? Does it create jobs when they're building homes? Oh yeah. Does it
Yeah,
create?
that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. It creates jobs for the people that are the builders, but also the people in the lumber industry. The people that are now. Rockford used to have a company called National Lock. You know, every house has a lock. You know, has a number of locks in it. So it encourages all kinds of job related or construction related jobs throughout the United States. And that's why they do it. So, yes, we use taxes to change behavior. Sometimes we want to encourage more of a certain behavior, and sometimes we want to encourage less of a certain behavior. And when you hear Congress today talk about, you can tell I'm an old poli sci teacher too, but you know, everybody wants to do tax reform. But one of the reasons it's so hard is because we have over the decades created all of these tax loopholes to try to disincentivize some behaviors and to try to encourage other kinds of behaviors. So it's a big deal. And my point is that this is something that was done way back in Rome, and we still do it today. So that's the idea of it. Is, you know, this stuff is not brand new. It's stuff that has been going on for quite a while here, and you know, and it will continue to go on. You know, everybody wants to have, okay, you know, flat tax. You know, charge me 17% income tax. No, it's just never going to happen because we want to use it to also encourage behavior changes. Uh, so here's kind of the bottom line of taxes. The government became more and more wasteful, and they increasingly relied on breads and circuses for entertainment, you know, where they'd feed their people, especially in the city of Rome, and they entertained them with, you know, all this stuff going on in the Colosseum and the Forum and all of these things. And they did that to placate the people, but they needed more and more money to do it. So they kept raising their the taxes. As the costs increased, yeah, taxes had to be raised to pay the new bill. This amount eventually became insufficient as the number of recipients, the people that were eating the free bread and, you know, going to the circuses grew. Then they had a problem with inflation, and inflation is where a dollar today doesn't buy as much as a dollar last week, last month, last year would. if you look at, and again, not trying to be critical of what goes on, but if you look in the United States today, the cost of a loaf of bread is probably $2 today. And 50 years ago, it might have been 50 cents or 25 cents or something like that. So those costs change over time. Now, if it goes up just a little bit, it's not a big deal. If it goes up a whole bunch very quickly, it's a real problem. Venezuela decided that they would just start printing money because then people wouldn't complain that they didn't, have any money. And when you just start printing money and throwing it out, that will cause runaway inflation, and that's a big problem. Now today, well, 6 months ago, the U.S. government started printing lots of money and giving it to people because of COVID-19, and all the businesses were closing and people were getting laid off. Now, because the U.S. government and the U.S. economy is strong enough, we're able to do that without having a rapid runaway inflation. However, if that goes on and on and on and on, we could have some serious problems in the future. John Green, who is very liberal, and you guys have seen some of the videos of John Green. He made a video in 2012 that I showed to my political science students, and what he said was this. He says, right now our national debt is $12 trillion, and it's not a problem unless the federal government keeps printing more and more without either cutting spending or raising revenue. And fast forward to today, I think our national debt is $25 trillion or something like that. So indeed, we didn't fix that problem that he was talking about from 10 years ago or 8 years ago, something like that. So, is there a problem? Not today. Could there be a problem in the future? Maybe. All right. So the federal government borrowed money. That's basically how we are able to print money now, is we borrow it. Excuse me for a second. So in Rome, as they borrowed money, their debt increased and more tax dollars were needed to pay the interest on that debt. The U.S. is going through that same issue right now. There was a burden that fell on the merchants. They kept getting higher and higher taxes, and eventually that caused unrest. This is in Rome. So when you look at Rome and then you look at today, our merchants today complaining that the taxes are too high. Yeah, everybody's always going to complain about that. In the state of Illinois, for example, one of the commercials going on now about the fair tax is that this is a bad time to raise taxes on merchants, small businesses, because they're just not able to cover those costs anymore. And remember, companies don't really pay taxes. They have to pass them on to their customers. So, that's a big deal. In Rome, there became more and more laws with more and more restrictions on freedom to make sure that the taxpayers were paying the taxes that they were supposed to. And eventually they started sending out their military to collect the taxes. And the tax collectors became more Neanderthal, which means they became meaner when they were collecting taxes. Maybe Neanderthal isn't the proper term, but you guys kind of get the idea. And when you have people that are collecting taxes that are, well, I'll go on to the next chart because that'll illustrate the point even better. Tax demands became so great that the producers no longer had sufficient wealth to expand their businesses. Businesses stagnated, and Rome steadily demanded more and more money. Rome, as a result of diminished tax receipts, could no longer pay the mercenary soldiers and tax collectors. So they started cutting the pay of the soldiers repeatedly, and the soldiers were not happy. So whether they were officially told us or not, they figured out that they could make up the shortfall by extracting further payment from taxpayers. In other words, if the government says you owe them $50, but we think you need to pay us $60 because we got to make up that shortfall in our own income. And actually what that did is that led to some looting, destruction, and rape by the soldiers. So that is not a good deal. And again, that's not going on in the United States right now, but you can see how something like that could happen. I'm not saying it will, but you can just imagine that circumstances would get bad enough that instead of people paying a fair amount of tax, that they would be picked on by extracting further payments. Each time this occurred, more and more merchants left Rome for the relative safety of the North. And pretty soon the barbarians were behaving in a more civilized manner than the civilized Roman government and its mercenaries. So in a state of Illinois, you see people leaving the state of Illinois. Why? Because the taxes are high and they're going to get higher. Now people aren't leaving the United States just yet. But again, you guys can see that there is a potential for this pattern to be repeated. That's the bottom line of all of this stuff. All right. So any questions on taxes? All right. So let me move on to a different topic. There is a video, and I guess I ought to put this up here. We'll just do it here. Video, if I can spell right, 4.5. And it is a guy that is just talking to you. But what he does is he talks about all of the things that we get from Rome. And he uses the acronym ALLCARE to address this. And I'm going to add in the idea of taxes because we get the idea of taxes from Rome, especially in terms of modifying behavior and stuff like that. So here is a potential test question. Use multiple sentences to discuss 8 different ways that Rome influenced the United States. And I'm going to cover this in the next chart, but I'm also going to talk about, did I lose you guys? No, I'm here. You're here. And I'm going to show you what the ALLCARE acronym stands for, but I'm not going to show you the video in class. This video, I think, is probably the single best video that I show you guys, even though it's just a guy talking and he's got some still pictures and stuff like that. But it really illustrates what of value we get from Rome. And I think it's pretty important. I have used this as a test question in the past. And I'll show you what the acronym stands for next. But when you're taking this particular video quiz, make sure that you're taking it in, because this thing it's probably going to be a test question. So remember where it is and what they're telling you. I almost showed this video in class today, but I figured that you guys are wise enough to be able to watch this video, take some notes on it, and be prepared for the final. And again, the final is not going to be until December, so we got a while. But this is the stuff that we get from Rome. We get our alphabet. And granted, alphabet is a Greek word, but we get our present-day alphabet from the Romans. We get many of our language basics from Rome as well. And the guy that does this video, Richie, will explain to you some of that stuff. The laws, and I'll talk more about laws here in just a little bit. but we get a lot of our laws from the Romans. You know, we get criminal law, we get civil law. Civil law is stuff that, you know, doesn't involve a crime, contracts, marriage, that kind of stuff. Our calendar, you know, July was Julius Caesar. August was Augustus Caesar. You guys get the idea, and he'll go into great detail on that too. But our calendar we get from the Romans, you know, and it's been modified over time. But the idea of the 12 months and blah, 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 blah is a Roman structure. Architecture, obviously, we get a lot of that from the Greeks, where and the Romans borrowed it from the Greeks, improved upon it with concrete and with arches and stuff like that. So we get architecture from them. Religion, and he'll get into a lot of detail on religion. We'll cover that in part now and part in later chapters when we talk about Judaism, Christianity. So we get a lot of religion and, you know, and how it has affected the world. We get that from Rome. He also covers entertainment. He'll scream and yell at you a little bit when he talks about entertainment. And then he'll talk about taxes. So what I'm going to ask you, besides doing the assignment that involves 4.5, the video, is I'm going to ask you, you know, okay, identify alphabet, but then explain it. You know, give me at least one sentence that explains what's going on with the alphabet that we got from Rome. And then same way with language and same way with laws and all of this stuff. So you guys get the idea there, right? I know it's too early to have questions on it, but does that seem reasonable that I'm going to ask you to give me each of those terms and then to explain the term? And if you just list them, you're not going to get full points. You have to explain, you know, how laws evolved or what kind of laws we get from Rome, for example. Then I'm going to ask you for an opinion, you know, which one of these is probably the most important in your opinion. And again, I don't care. You guys just need to figure that out, you know, after you listen to his video. Or you can always pick on taxes because, you know, Finnegan thought that taxes were kind of important because he went and yacked on them for about 15 minutes or so this morning. Questions? Okay. Here's what I would like to do next is I'm going to show you a short video on Pax Romana. And again, we remember that during a peaceful time is when culture can grow. Pax Romana means the Roman peace. And Hammurabi, remember, he had a bunch of laws. And what the purpose of writing those laws was, is then you weren't just subject to the whim of the ruler. It codified, it wrote down, this is the rule, this is why, this is what happens to you if you break the rule, that kind of a thing. And so the Rome, you know, basically built on that idea big time. And we'll watch probably, even though this is a 6-minute video, we'll only see about 3 minutes of it here. And I'll explain that to you in just a little bit. Now I got to switch over to the other screen.
Of all Rome's contributions to Western civilization, Roman law is probably their greatest legacy. It has been said that law and order were Rome's biggest exports. As the Roman Empire expanded, the Romans imposed their legal system on the territories that they conquered. Feuding nations, one by one, fell into the fold of the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, and the Mediterranean entered an era of peace and prosperity that lasted for about 2 centuries. Roman law has a history nearly as old as Rome itself. In the early days of the Republic, Roman law was held in the minds and memories of Rome's judges and magistrates. Such a system was prime for abuse. A magistrate could forget or even change laws on a whim, and there was no way to question him. And since magistrates were aristocrats, or patricians, as the Romans called them, the common people, or plebs, had little hope of finding justice in such a system. The plebs protested this justice system for many years, until at last, in 450 BCE, Roman law was codified and written down in the famous 12 Tables of Rome. This written law guaranteed that all, high as well as low, were subject to the laws of Rome. As the years went by and the Republic matured and became more inclusive, the Roman legal system was reformed to accommodate these changes. The rulings of judges began to be used as precedent for future cases, as did the edicts of praetors. Simultaneously, philosophical ideals from Stoicism found their way into Roman law. These reforms did not stop with the death of the Republic and the rise of the Principate.
Hold on. Okay, so what we see here is that Rome had some really good ideas in writing these things down so that you didn't have judges acting independently. They had to follow precedents, just like we do today.
Roman emperors, struggling to deal with the new challenges of the empire, would often appoint imperial jurists to refine and interpret the law. From Gaius to Ulpian to Paulus, these jurists helped establish the philosophical underpinnings of law, creating a philosophy of justice that endures to this day. So let us take a look at the fruits of these men's labors and explore the scope and depth of Roman law. The Romans...
All right, so that's as much as we're going to get on that one. And here's the deal on this, you guys. I find these particular videos just really interesting. However, last year when I taught this class, I could spend $15 and I could show you guys all of these videos. Well, now it's up to like $80 or something like that a semester. And I'm just not going to do it. So we get to watch just a little bit of this, but I think you guys get the idea of the value of Pax Romana and Roman law. You know, that's the other piece of this is they give you just enough to cover it. Now, here is the guy from, this is Richie, and this is the guy that does the ALLCARE video. So when you see him, you know, you guys will be able to do that. What do we have next? All right. So last but not least, I'm going to show you one more video because everything's working today. But this is kind of an outline of Roman history. And what I want you to do is just sit back and kind of take this in. Just like the last one was mainly about Roman law. And I guess the big takeaway from that is that Rome created precedents and codified laws, and we still use that today. So that's the takeaway from the last video. This one, they're going to tell you, and this is history. This is not a history class, right? But you know, you got to understand at least a little bit of history here to get the points of Rome. They're going to talk about Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar. Then they'll talk about all kinds of other stuff. But then they'll talk about a guy by the name of Diocletian, and he split the empire into two different pieces. And he'll give you some times associated with this. And then you'll hear about the Emperor Constantine. And Constantine, basically, well, he'll tell you about Constantine too. So we're going to go ahead and get some things going here. So here we go.
Welcome to Ancient History Encyclopedia. My name is Kelly, and today I'm going to be...
All right, Kelly, you're talking too fast. I think we can play her at 1.25 speed. Then we'll see how this goes.
taking you through a short introduction into the expansive history of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was the largest empire that the ancient world, so pre-476 CE, had ever seen. At its height...
You know what? I'm going to play her just at the regular speed here. Sorry, I'm going to cost you guys another minute.
It covered all the lands around the Mediterranean Sea and parts of Northern Europe, Africa, and the Near East. The empire lasted for over 1,000 years, beginning in 31 BCE and ending in 476 CE in the west and 1453 CE in the east. Let's have a look at how the empire began, some of the key events and emperors, and how it eventually fell. Before the Roman Empire, there was the Roman Republic. In the year 27 BCE, Octavian, the nephew of Julius Caesar, became the first emperor of Rome and adopted the title Augustus Caesar. Now, I know you might be thinking, wasn't Julius Caesar the first Roman emperor? Well, although he is often regarded as such, he was never actually granted the title of emperor. He was, however, granted the title of dictator, which the Senate begrudgingly gave to him, giving him supreme military and political power. Now, it's important to remember in the time of the Roman Republic that it was not the norm to put all the power into the hands of one man. This was actually the first thing that they decided to change when they got rid of their kings, changing from a monarchy to a republic. Now, back to Augustus. Due to his success in destroying Rome's enemies and bringing stability to the empire, the Senate willingly granted him the title of emperor. Augustus ruled until he died in 14 CE, and his last words are said to have been, "I found Rome a city of clay and left it a city of marble." He reformed laws, he initiated vast building projects, he secured Rome's borders, and secured the empire a lasting name as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, cultural and political powers in history.
Okay, so here's a Finnegan commentary on that. Here's the good news is that he did a lot of good stuff for Rome. Here's the bad news is he was instrumental in changing it from a republic to an empire where all the power was vested in one person. And that works great if you got a good leader, and it sucks if you don't. Finnegan's little take on that.
Following Augustus was his heir, Tiberius, who lacked the strength in character and vision that made Augustus such a successful emperor. Then came Caligula, the cruel one, Claudius, the paranoid one, and Nero, the crazy one. These 5 emperors are referred to as the Julio-Claudian dynasty from the 2 family names that each of the emperors were descended from, Julius and Claudius. Nero's suicide in 68 CE initiated the period of social unrest which is known as the Year of the 4 Emperors. Within the year, there were 4 rulers, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian. The year was full of deaths and swift successions to the throne, with men each less qualified to rule than the last, until Vespasian. When Vespasian ascended the throne, he initiated the Flavian dynasty, which can be distinguished by the large building projects such as the Colosseum, economic prosperity, and expansion of the empire. It was under the Emperor Trajan, who ruled between 98 and 117 CE, when the empire truly began to reach its height. Trajan is noted as one of the 5 good emperors of Rome, along with Nerva, Hadrian, who built the famous wall across the Scottish border of Roman territory, Antonius Pius, who built the Antonine Wall in Scotland, and Marcus Aurelius, the so-called philosopher king and author of the Meditations. It was under the reign of Hadrian, between 117 and 121 CE, when Rome gained its greatest geographical extent and political power. The empire fell into an era of instability and turmoil.
Okay, just look at how big this empire was. I mean, present day Armenia, present day, this is Iraq right here, Mesopotamia. You can see down on the North African border, all the way out in the Iberian Peninsula here, Spain and Portugal, all the way up into Great Britain. Huge. And it would be difficult to control that today. Imagine what a challenge that was back when you had no communication other than physically sending somebody to share messages and information and that kind of thing. So it was very cumbersome because it was so big. And we'll hear about that in just a minute.
Between 235 and 284 CE. This period is known as the crisis of the 3rd century. The empire was constantly fighting civil wars and experiencing social unrest and economic upheaval. The empire was reunited by Aurelian, but by 285 CE, the empire was simply too large to be ruled by the central government in Rome. At this time, it was split by Emperor Diocletian into a Western and Eastern empire. But then, 27 years later, Constantine became the sole ruler of the Eastern and Western empires. he named the city of Byzantium the new capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, which was also known as the Byzantine Empire, and renamed it Constantinople, which is now modern-day Istanbul. In the 4th century, Christianity had started to take hold throughout the empire. In 313 CE, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, declaring religious tolerance of all religions throughout the empire, especially Christianity. In 380 CE, under Emperor Theodosius I, Christianity became the state religion. He outlawed all pagan worship, closed the schools and universities, and converted all pagan temples into Christian churches. One question we hear a lot is, why did the Roman Empire fall? It should be noted that the fall of Rome only refers to the western part of the empire, which fell in 476 CE. The eastern part of the empire continued until 1453 CE. Towards the end of the 4th century, the Goths started to invade Roman territory, causing the Gothic Wars. Scholars date the beginning of the end of the Western Roman Empire to 378 CE, when the Emperor Valens was defeated at the Battle of Adrianople by Goth forces under Fritigern. After all this talk of economic strength and geographic expansion, it isn't easy to find the cause of the fall of such a large empire. A sole cause has never been agreed on, and it's understandably so, as the decline took about 300 years. However, there are many factors that ought to be mentioned. These factors include political instability due to the size of the empire, the self-interest of the two halves of the empire, invasion of barbarian tribes, government corruption, reliance on mercenary armies, over-reliance on slave labor damaging the economy, massive unemployment, and inflation.
Okay, so this is just like Finnegan wrote this thing here. These factors include political
Due to the size of the empire, the self-interest of the two halves of the empire, invasion of barbarian tribes, government corruption, reliance on mercenary armies, over-reliance on slave labor damaging the economy, massive unemployment, and inflation.
So we have the potential for some of that stuff here, but again, this is just an overview.
All these factors working together, there was also the introduction of Christianity, which has been noted as a pivotal factor in the decline of the empire. Before Christianity, the emperor was considered divine, and the so-called cult of the emperor encouraged worship of whoever held the position as a god. During the crisis of the 3rd century, this became a real problem, for an emperor who naturally wanted to stay in power and do as he wanted as the head of the government would come to favour the military with higher pay and other gifts. The military kept the emperor in power only for as long as he was doing what they felt he should, and so the military came to decide who would rule Rome and for how long. How did the empire come to its final end? Well, the empire ended in the west when the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic king Odoacer in 476 CE. Between 962 and 1806, the Western Roman Empire was reinvented as the Holy Roman Empire, but was only an empire in name. In the east, the empire continued as the Byzantine Empire until around 1453 CE, with the death of Constantine XI and the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks.
All right, back to here. And we are just about to the end. Now, what she did is she kind of summarized the whole rest of our class here, of the semester. But anyway, the biggest takeaways that I want you to get from this are the fact that Rome got bigger and then it kind of fell apart. Diocletian was the guy that split the empire into two halves so it'd be easier to manage. Constantine, we're going to talk about him further, but I think that's enough. I'm gonna share some other stuff with you next time, but I think we've covered enough today. So any questions on what we covered today? I'm going to stop recording.